gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on this auspicious occasion of getting all the Albarns in the room at the same time, with their work.
Yes.
That's the point, that's the point. So this is to solidify really and explain what this exhibition, Unrelated Journeys, as Jess told me it was called, and I said, but surely that's related. Unrelated Journeys, it being...
Well, you could have put both in.
Well, I did.
Yeah.
I did.
On the website.
I did on the website. Anyway, so the reason why this exhibition came to be was because Jess kindly brought Keith and Hazel to come and meet my mum at my mum's 90th retrospective show in this gallery. Her name is Sophie Parkin, and Keith had actually worked with her at a certain point in the 1960s when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and he had built a fun palace, and he also had a connection working with Cedric Price, who was my mother's boyfriend at the time. And we went and did a fashion shoot in the Fun Palace, and I got to wear the Mickey Mouse ears, so I was well pleased. And it remains a memory, such a strong memory in my own life, and I'm 61 now, and I can remember it as if it was yesterday, running around the Fun Palace. And when you think back on your life, there are some things which are transformative, things that happen in your life to make you look at the world in a different way. And I think that going into the Fun Palace was probably my earliest transformative memory. So that when I got to speak to Keith, I was so excited. Oh, shut up, Mum. No, I'm not exactly like that. She'd actually already had to leave. But I then started to talk to Hazel and to Jess about putting an exhibition of all of their work together as artists, because I don't think enough is explored. We choose artists as heroes that seem to come out of nowhere, and they're there highlighted for the world to admire their artwork. But, you know, creation doesn't happen in a void. And I think this thing of being nurtured by your surroundings and the other people that you share your house with, your food with, your life with when you're growing up, is very instrumental as to your creative process in life. Keith, what do you think about that?
That's fine, next one.
Okay, going to make it a little bit harder for you.
Now, could I just add one thing?
Yes.
I think the wonderful thing, perhaps about even this event, is memory. Mm-hmm. And you're referring to memory to some extent, and in my case, a great extent. And the series of things that one does as artists, or artistes, or whatever you like to call us, enjoyed by people at the time, youth, in their youth, come again as memories later, to such a degree that I begin to think, have I got a different memory? The enrichment of memory in our general levels of creativity is a very important part of all this. And that relates the unrelated. And the journeys we've taken have all been very much as individuals, but infected each other and engaged memories ad nauseum, good and bad.
But also, wouldn't you say that I look at Jess's work and I can see your influence?
Yeah.
And I can see Hazel's very clearly. Both of those things seem to be that in Jess they come together as one.
Yeah. I would perfectly accept that. Yeah, I mean, that does happen. But I think a lot of it has been unconscious, or even if it has been conscious, it's been more, well, how do you do this? And let's meet Jessica and Hazel, or what do you think of this? What do you think about it? How do you respond to what I'm spending this valuable time doing?
It's responding to ideas and thoughts and what you see around you and how that kind of...
So they are, in our heads, unrelated journeys, but in practice they've grown up together, obviously.
But can I just ask you, so what was your family background?
Really? You can ask. I often wonder. I had a very particular background. My father was a pacifist, an anarchist, and a self-styled iconoclast, which means it's bloody tough because you're constantly being questioned about everything you do. Questioning became something that I was infected with and still am, and respect a somewhat difficult memory. Nevertheless, there's riches there which I have benefited from. But the idea of surviving as a different person in ideas terms, but engaging in other ways, physically and so forth, in the society in which you live, has sort of held it all together for me, I suppose. But I've still left, well, not still left, I'm still engaged in trying to understand this journey called life, and have found role-playing, I think probably even more difficult than my parents did, in sense of feeling slightly out of it.
Yeah. Can I interrupt though? Because they were both very creative. One was an
I've been wanting
architect.
to say that.
That's what I wanted to say.
He's an architect.
Father was an architect and mother was
a painter.
Engraver. But she was also a very good musician. She played the piano.
And they did meet at art school like we did.
Yeah.
Well, there we go.
So it's a very direct line.
Generations,
Whether you like it or not.
generations.
Yeah.
Can't avoid the pattern.
But what about you, Hazel?
Well, I mean, it was wonderful when I met Keith, because I came across a family that I'd been denied all this, being a farmer's daughter. And when I went to art school, I hadn't been to an exhibition. I didn't know an artist. I didn't know anybody who was in the art world. Just my art teacher said to me one day, Hazel, you're very good and you should go to art school. Don't let anybody else tell you not. So I went. I wasn't particularly academic, so it seemed like a way I could, if I could get to art school, I could get out of Lincolnshire and being a farmer's daughter and all that entailed. And so when I met Keith, I mean, it was an amazing family. I mean, they just thought in a completely different way, and it was very exciting, really, yeah.
And so then that took you on your individual artistic journey.
Because I'm very, very different. Keith and I are like opposite ends, totally.
It's obvious, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
It works somehow.
Yes, I mean, but we did work in the 60s, really, quite a lot. In Kingley Street, we did a lot of sort of what was called environmental stuff then, and we worked on projects then together. Only the thing was, when I had children, that slightly means you're not as available to do all the things you want to do. And then I was very ill. I had a burst appendix, and that made me step back because I had to get myself better again. And so I then started to work on my journey, and Keith went very much on his journey. But you know, we'd sort of almost grown up together, and artistically, almost.
So you've known each other since you were 18, were you, Mum?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so
which art school was it?
Well, it was Nottingham, and then there was a group of us that decided that we'd go down to London, which was very unusual then, because you were supposed to stay with your art school and go in, I should have gone into painting there. And I went to Kingston, and you went to Hammersmith.
Yeah.
And there were 2 other friends.
I actually dropped out of architecture, and because I was told that it was very unlikely anybody was going to want to build things like I was doing as a student, and it's true. So I moved to sculpture, yeah. So we went down, a group of us, and very unpopular for doing so, and engaged ourselves with London in the 60s, which was great. I mean, just magic time,
yeah.
really.
I mean,
Looking back,
Kingly Street was where it was all at.
Well, it was.
Because it was Carnaby Street,
yes,
wasn't it?
next door to Carnaby
It was
Street.
great swinging 60s London,
it was,
and
it was
I
so
remember it as a child going down there, and you know, boutiques full of feather boas.
Yes,
Girls with white lipstick
that's what
and courage boots and
Yeah.
looking fabulous.
Very quant and all.
And yes, the Quant story, that's another one, yes. It's interesting because I suppose never quite fitting in, I think I've been very lucky in surviving between 3 stools, design and hippiedom and teaching. And that summarises it really. But the 3 have interacted.
You got employed as a teacher is a miracle in itself.
It is indeed. Yes. That was at Walthamstow with Beau Shearer and all that lot. And I didn't really get on with them either, you know, very well, because I hadn't followed the right route. That bunch of people in the 60s were of a year or 2 older than me, and they were very close as a group, so close in fact that they couldn't get degrees sorted out. That was my job, come in and help get it together.
And you came in and shook them all up a bit.
Yes, I did. Yes.
But I don't think the art world has changed that much, has it?
No.
There seems to be this route that you're supposed to take in order to become an artist,
Exactly.
and in order to be accepted, and in order to be something that can be monetised and shown in frieze, which of course is going on at this moment whilst we speak. And I mean, how do you feel about that, Jess?
Well, because I haven't really taken my path has not been, as an artist, I had children early, at 23 I got pregnant, so I didn't get to go and do my MA, and go along that route. So I just sort of made it up as I went along, really. And I built a studio at the end of my garden, which was the best thing I ever did. And I just got to work and just found my way and had shows and put on shows. But yeah, I didn't get that sort of, if I'd done an MA and I'd gone on that route, it would have maybe been different, I don't know. But yeah, I guess I've found my own path as well, really.
That's why we're honorary, because we're all very different.
Yeah.
I mean, I did a lot of teaching.
Yeah, you were
but I
destined
didn't do much
teaching,
teaching in art schools. It was basically in schools, and I loved teaching, all well, in fact, I've taught all ages from about 5 up to 90. The oldest one came to one workshop at the Minutes and said, I'm 90 and I'm going to join your class. Henrietta Fanshawe, who's the most wonderful woman. And I just like that. I like the freedom of working in a school, because there's no syllabus. You're not working with anything like that. You just go in, you've got a couple of weeks, and you're going to do something magical in their hall. You're going to change it into, I know one thing I did was sort of underwater. We changed the whole of the hall into an underwater thing, and we had oil and water slides, and the kids came for the last day. They came in swimming costumes and brought picnics, and absolutely, because kids will enter into this.
Yeah.
And they believe it.
Yeah.
And it was a day at the beach for them, and they created their beach and they enjoyed it, and it is, and that's what I like doing. That's the sort of
Well, it's
teaching
fun,
I do.
isn't it?
And it's
Yeah.
creating those memories, like you say, and you never know what's going to have an impact on
No.
a child.
Yeah,
You know,
No.
and it can be something, you know, just a visitor that comes to your school that brings an interesting idea, or
yeah.
you know, none of us know really what's going to impact.
What's going to trigger, like,
Yeah,
you know,
trigger-
my
trigger
teacher said to me
a
one
path,
day,
yeah.
you should go to art school, Hazel, and I just believed her because she was just one glimmer of hope. So
Out in Loseby. We do love Loseby.
But
It's my cousin.
but Jess,
Yeah.
was this like, is this how it felt to grow up? Is that you'd come home from school and suddenly your mum would say, "We're turning the living room into a beach and we're going to change,
Well, she was always-
into your swimsuit"?
Not quite that, but she was always working. She was always kind of, you're always creative, you're always making things.
Yeah.
Sometimes they were quite strange things, and sometimes they were, you know, but you're always doing things.
Yeah.
And, you know, and Dad obviously was running the art school, and I went to Dad's art school. And my mum got me, you know, my mum helped me get my portfolio together because the department at my secondary school art class was
It's
pretty terrible.
very-
So I wouldn't have probably got into college if it hadn't been for you. But Mum and I also, we connected with animals, and which comes from her childhood, and she taught me to ride, and it was a very sort of gypsy-like setup with these ponies from in the village that Mum trained. So we had this sort of, you know, and then we went on and had shows together quite early on.
yeah, we did, yes.
So we sort of worked together and got on,
Yeah,
did
quite closely,
interesting
yeah.
things,
Yeah.
went on travels, and you know.
Yes, we went to Nepal together, which was marvellous.
Yeah, and that was very inspiring.
I was
Yeah.
50 and what were you, 21 or
21.
something, and we thought we don't want a party, let's go somewhere exciting. So we just went on the plane. We didn't
Yeah.
know.
What did you do,
So we
Keith?
left him
He said-
behind.
he
I
said-
I was actually, I mean, looking back, I don't know whether I was irresponsible or whatever, but I couldn't have done anything about it with these two. But they went off. I had no idea where they were going to stay. They said they were
Well,
going
this was
to
before
Nepal.
mobile phones, so you didn't.
No
you didn't
mobile
check up.
phones. There was no way
We
of
didn't know
checking
what
up.
we were
with-
doing
It was
anyway.
about a
Yeah.
fortnight
That's
before we got in
weird. I
touch.
went to India with
Did
my
you?
mum.
Did you?
Yeah.
But to the south, not to
Right,
the
yeah.
north.
It was a
And
wonderful
Paul was
thing.
great. We had a wonderful
Yeah.
time there.
But you know, so they both inspired me in many different ways, and I think with Dad, because he was working, you know, he was at college, but then he was doing his books,
Yeah.
and I was aware of quite, you know, as a young child when he went to Iraq, which was this, you know, this as a child hearing your father go to this place, and you know, it was quite exotic, but a very
yeah.
another, well, how to put it, very
Another world.
another world, and then coming back and doing these patterns. And then they also, in our house, we had a lot of kind of ethnic stuff around, and but you working away on your patterns all the time, and you know, no, but I found that fascinating, and it did go in. I mean, that's the thing, it's sort of, it made sense to me, but on in a different way. I wouldn't say I've got my dad's brain at all, in that, you know, you're much
Probably
cleverer
better.
than I am,
No.
and mathematical. But I come at it from a different, in a different way. But it all went, yeah, but as we were saying earlier, it all goes in, doesn't it? All these
Yeah.
things.
I was building terrace housing for guinea pigs.
Yes, you were, which that was lovely.
And when I came back, I wasn't as
Front
always.
palaces for guinea
front
pigs.
palaces for guinea pigs.
It was a bit
I
of
had
a
lots of guinea
disappointment
pigs.
because I brought back a carpet, and son, who is not
Damon-
here,
Damon
Damon was quite convinced that I brought a magic carpet back.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Well, you did, you went to Baghdad.
Saying on the carpet,
And it was
like
actually
that, right,
wonderful.
don't they?
It was wonderful. There were the reason I went was I went as a sort of art critic for Studio International, which dates us, and
Oh,
it
it was
the
a big,
first-
a big art magazine in those days.
and
wasn't
this
it?
was
Studio
big for
International.
Iraq and the Middle East because it was the first Arab Biennale. They had planned further ones, but circumstances prevented that, as we all know. But I met some 13 representatives from some 13 Arab countries in a fortnight there, and they were so hospitable, and it was hard work. I mean, we went all over Iraq, which was a wonderful country.
Yeah, you were
Being entertained.
incredibly
Being
fortunate.
entertained.
Oh my God,
When,
that must have
you
been
know, in
terrible.
all its glory.
Oh, it was so hard.
Yeah.
And they were lovely, and and it was history.
And I remember you came back to me, you ate, was it bumblebees dipped in chocolate?
Yes,
Because you know, it was a childish memory. That stayed with me. Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing.
No, I'd want to do that, but no.
So this is a little book that I would like to big up because it looks like a pamphlet. It is a pamphlet, I suppose. But it is something that Keith did in 1970.
Yeah, roughly.
So somewhere around there, early 70s.
Yeah, it was early 70s.
And we've printed up 150 copies, and it was done on your first computer, wasn't it?
First computer.
So
yes.
it's
Claris Works was the software.
with Claris Works
Claris Works, that's
typography, but what is actually written in it is amazing and deep and thoughtful. And if you can get past the jazzy typography to the meaning underneath, it is really quite profound. I cannot say enough about that because I have spent, during the whole of lockdown, I've studied the whole of Jung's work and also all the ancient Greek, so I know about reading philosophy, and this seems to encapsulate quite a lot of that.
Oh,
in a simple
that.
2 pages, a simple 2-page story, really. Anyway, so I suggest everybody not only buy one of these fabulous works of art, but also take this home to meditate over. It's really
It has
excellent.
only just appeared. I mean, one of the contributors to helping put this out showed me something that he did, Dario.
Dario, yeah.
And
Let's mention Dario a bit more from the Jealous Gallery because he was instrumental in curating the show.
enormously.
Yeah.
because it hasn't appeared. It appeared a bit of it appeared once in the newspaper. Well, Art Monthly for art teachers or something, and but since then it hasn't appeared.
Yeah, it's
So
been
I-
hidden, Dad.
But
It's been hidden.
yes, yes.
Well, now it's time to reveal, but there's only 150 of them. And they're a £5 each. So I've done my little bit of marketing. And now we're going to go for questions from the floor. Does anybody have any questions? Put your hand up.
Unrelated. How did you meet in art school? How did you connect, the two of you?
Well,
You or me.
Did you meet
it
on
was
the
at
train?
no. It was a lecture I went up at the School of Architecture, and then I.
There is a sort of
Yeah.
crazy background to that though, because my parents had only just moved into Lincolnshire, and I had the great, joyful task of leaving home and having a bed sitter in the town of my birth, which, having been to a co-ed grammar school in the same city of Nottingham, gave me a very pleasant start to my college life. Meanwhile, we got together at Nottingham, only to find then that our parents were only 4 miles apart in Lincolnshire, 60 miles away.
It's amazing.
Cycle over, but there was this big problem that.
They hated each other.
Yeah. Keith's parents were conscientious objectors, and my dad was. He did sell some farmland to him, but he didn't quite understand their thinking.
Well, you should
He
say
was not
maybe
an
about
adult.
Holton, really.
Yes,
that's
Holton
quite
cum
important.
Beckering was the village that my parents had moved to, which was sort of celebrated as one of the villages in the UK where pacifists gathered together and shared all their
So it was a lot of
it was
great
a
knowledge.
Yes, I've heard of it.
It was a commune. It was a commune.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also at the primary school, this meant that there were all sorts of kids there. You know, their dads
Your primary
lawyer,
school.
and the head teacher there was only a tiny wee little village school, but she was also a conscientious objector. And they all had a far different way of thinking than what an average...
What date was this that your parents moved there?
59, 60, that sort of year. Yeah.
But when you were at primary, that would be...
So it was...
And it
I
was
mean,
2
Jim
years
Broadbent,
later.
I don't know if any of you know Jim Broadbent, I'm sure you do. Well, all the Broadbents were at that school. So there were all sorts of different kids that I wouldn't have... A normal village school, I'd have never have come across. So it was
Because
great
obviously
for me.
it must have been set up post the First World War, I imagine, wasn't it?
No, post the second.
Second.
Okay.
Was it just
Yeah.
after the war, before, during?
It was set out just before the second.
Yeah, so just before. So it would
I
have
was
been
born in
Yeah,
late 30s.
I was born in 1942. So
Yeah.
There were 2 or 3 people who had some serious money in their background, and that was all in the pool. So that enabled those that had joined with lesser goodies could, begin to establish a way of life for which they were totally unprepared, despite losing their jobs, houses, etc., etc.
And this will
Because of
happen to
being
And my
conscientious
parents were not
objectors,
involved in that,
But your father did lose his
as a
business.
pacifist,
Yeah.
he lost his opportunity to operate as an architect effectively because he was, we as a family had Jewish refugees staying with us and so on, and the only family that were prepared to communicate with us was a Jewish family just up half a mile away up the road. So it was a bit of an odd situation, a bit different.
Yeah, but it's interesting then that you went into all of this environmental stuff as well, because everybody thinks nowadays about the environmental movement as if it was they've invented it recently. But it's been going on forever.
Absolutely.
It's been going on since before the Industrial Revolution. In fact, if you look back and
people saw that some people saw
William
the
Blake,
yes,
etc., etc. So that's what is interesting. Yes, Stuart?
Jess, about the importance of materials in your work and what mediums you like to work in.
I'm kind of interested in layers. So it's kind of the materials that I've kind of gone for have often, like I've worked in wax and in this show with the handmade paper. And the reason for that is because with those pieces just where you are, I wanted to do some work that had elements of both my parents just for this show. So my mum has made handmade paper, and I've actually made it with you, and I've done work. So that was my mum, and then my dad, I used like the patterns from Diagram, this book that he co-wrote, and that I've obviously had quite a lot of influence on me. But the materials, it's sort of seeing through things, it's layers, it's kind of what I'm kind of fascinated by, really. And also surface, I mean, when, drawing, obviously the surface you work on has a lot of effects on the mark making, as well. So, that answers it.
Can I ask Jess?
Yeah.
Why the particular focus on rabbits, bees, butterflies?
Well, they're all the things I draw. They kind of come. They come to me for a reason, really. And like the whole bee thing happened because I found a bee, and I still actually have it. Back in 2007, found this bee in my garden, and I decided to draw it. And I drew it really big, and then I kind of just I get obsessed with the detail. And then I just started drawing bees and more bees, and I was collecting bees, and then I became more and more conscious of the whole fact that bees were in decline, and I got involved with the Bumblebee Conservation Trust, and with rabbits I have a particular affinity with rabbits. I had beautiful rabbit recently died, but we mustn't talk about that. So they all kind of. I have some kind of connection with or memory and the foxes I've done. I did a film recently about foxes, and I was filming mostly during lockdown, collecting footage of urban foxes.
But you were going to be a vet for a very long time.
Oh, that was my first love, yeah, and then I realised I wasn't clever enough. But I do love animals, and so they're a very important element of my work, really. But yes, they all have some meaning to me, basically. Yeah.
Well, perhaps we can show the Fox film
I'd
here.
love to, yeah.
Do a projection
Yeah.
of it.
It is lovely.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, no, that would be great. Yeah, you saw. We pulled that quickly together and for the Whitechapel thing. Yeah, which was great.
Well,
But,
let's do that for
that
the
would be
closing.
brilliant.
For the closing
Yeah.
night.
Yeah, that would be cool. Yeah, excellent.
So, Keith, I just wondered, the pattern thing is part of your Iraqi experience, is it? Yeah, I suppose so. But but it goes back before that, really. I was very lucky in a series of exhibitions at the ICA in the Mall. And the first one was Cybernetic Serendipity, which was sort of appropriate kick-off, although I didn't think so at the time. But we were working on that, and we had a bit in that. And then following that, there were connections with Penrose, who took over the ICA around about then. Bless him, he sold some of his Picassos to keep the ICA going while I was sort of doing things there. And so there were exhibitions, and then an old friend of mine, and sorry, I'll try and keep this tight, while I was discussing an exhibition about the environment and so forth with Penrose, this old friend who'd been waiting for this lengthy meeting to finish, so he could get on, and he came over, and it ended up with designing the first World of Islam festival in London. Now, in order to do that, I had to do a lot of homework. And out of that came Thames and Hudson interested, because the exhibition was then able to go to Holland and was tripled in size. Through that, people in his last year, like Escher, came to it, so that it sort of, the impact of it exceeded our skills. We had done all this really as innocents coming to terms with this extraordinary culture of which we knew very little, and our background in the UK was also very thin in cultural appreciation outside the colonies. So that was the background, really. I won't bore you with it. But that led me into, the only thing I have to say, it had a huge impact on a way of thinking which the early Muslim scientists, philosophers, artists, poets, all in one, were able to syncretize and bring together and synthesize cultures from China to India to Europe, etc., and laid the way for the Renaissance. So there, we have to blame them for that. And I learned a lot about ways of thinking. And yes, of course, pattern was very much part of it. So I've explored pattern in all fields of human experience that I can find. And it has determined a lot of things that I feel very strongly about, like don't believe anything, keep questioning. Yeah.
Cheryl.
Hi, Keith. I just wondered if you could describe to us what the first Fun Palace was like that you were involved in, because I know that Joan Littlewood was very involved in this, and how you found it, and that's kind
well,
of...
it did actually start with, on a personal level, Hazel was referring to our early days in King Street. That attracted Joan, because she liked nutters, and she'd collect nutters.
Colourful people.
And she remembered she was directing with strong connections to the art world, but nevertheless buried in Stratford East, which had slum properties round it. So there was this theatre in the midst of this, you know.
And a lot
as an
of bombs.
oasis. Oh yeah,
Lots of bombing around there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And real East End stuff, you know. And she thought that some of the sort of mad things we were doing, which would go down quite well with her locals and would attract some attention and needed to be spread as a sort of thematic concept on a bigger scale, hence Cedric Price, etc., and Richard Rogers and so forth. And Joan's gang of angry young men would be collected together for Sunday evenings on the stage, which is where we chatted. And it was out of that I got impatient, frankly, with the slow progress of these vast schemes. So when the opportunity arose, through the publicity we were gathering doing mad things, some of which were orchestrated very much by Joan, Bubble City, etc. But prior to that, we were offered the theatre to have a mad weekend in. So I got poets and God knows what, all the nutters that I knew, together, and we took over the theatre. And Joan very kindly.
Is that when you got involved then?
Yes.
That's that one.
Yeah, that was the poster behind the camera. Yeah. And that's almost a metaphorical fact. But that was the kick-off point. And then, out of all that, we had, back at Kingly Street, one day, and it was a mad place, Kingly Street, 3 gentlemen appeared, dressed in very smart little city suits and so on, but slightly off the wall, suddenly announced that they had come all the way from Glasgow, but they were from Ayr, and they wanted to promote their city, their town rather, village rather, of Girvan on the west coast of Scotland, of which I'd heard nothing, and they wanted us to do something that would attract attention, like a fun palace. So that's where it started. By which time, with the stuff we'd been working with other artists and so forth and developing this sort of thing, I thought, God, this is my opportunity, I'm going to do it. And so we did what we could with what was a very modest budget, looking back. I was not the best of businessmen. But it caused 1 or 2 people memories of such strength that very recently a couple of very nice guys have been quite obsessed. One of them, aged 7, went to this 5th dimension, which was the name of the fun palace, which is illustrated there. And it was a sort of bubble city of its sort, which was just designed to get people to think and feel about the environment. I have to mention in reverential tones, as an architect to be and then not, decided it, well, it was decided for me really, I think you've got better things to do with your time than what you were doing as an architectural student, was Buckminster Fuller, who I brought, I didn't bring, the first step was I met as he came to give a talk to the architectural students in Nottingham. And then later, when I was running a fine art course at the new Polytechnic, that gave me an excuse to see if I could get hold of him to come and talk to the students. And 4.5 hour long lecture was entertaining and thought-provoking, and still I get chats or discussions from ex-students remembering that 4.5 hours. Yeah, and there was the early eco man, big time. Yeah, and architecturally it was interesting. And he was evidence of somebody who didn't need to be labelled as architect, artist, philosopher, mathematician, and one of the ways of thinking that attracted me. And so he has been an influence, so I give due note of that.
Excellent. Yes.
Just a really kind answer, but did you find the lockdown as an occasion to focus and unleash creativity a bit more, or was it a bit of a sort of block for you? You know, a lot of people were stressed and they couldn't really focus or create.
It wasn't the drama that, I mean, we've been very privileged. I did actually have COVID, but I was so privileged that I have no memory
You got
of
it
it
quite
at all.
badly. Yeah.
I mean, I really have no memory at all. I remember,
It was all
going to bed, which for me is a very unusual act in the middle of the day, feeling exhausted. I went to sleep. And then some days later, which I can never really pin down, I'm told that I was very ill because I woke up with the doctor by my bed and the family around the bed, you know. I think, what the hell is going on? I think it was night time, wasn't it, or something?
Maybe that's the only time when you stopped working, Dad, because you just generally work all
But
the
so
time.
COVID, I had it, but it didn't actually affect what I was doing. It might well have infected my processes to that degree, but we live a silly life between London and Devon, and so we did escape occasionally and come back and wear the mask appropriately or inappropriately sometimes, not having it. So we've survived it. Yeah. Very lucky.
It was like living on an island. We didn't. I don't think that we.
A lot of people didn't want to know us.
Yeah, they were very friendly.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a funny time. I mean, for me, I had to keep working.
Yeah.
And and I was talking earlier about artist support pledge, which was great, I think, for a lot of artists during that time, and the fact that people did carry on at that point. People were buying small works for their houses because they were in their houses, but it was quite a sort of creative time.
I mean,
really.
work-wise, I did do a lot of those model-making things. Which
And also, when you're an artist, you work in
you just
isolation
do it.
anyway. Don't
I've got
you?
a
You just
monkey on
carry
my
on.
back, and I can't take credit for anything I've done really that anybody might think was good. A lot of people would agree with my view of them, but that's not really the place and time to discuss that. But that monkey just keeps you working, and if the facilities disappear for some reason, like COVID and things around me, I find other ways of working. So that's what I did. Yeah.
Well, I think we've just about wrapped it up, haven't we? I think that's quite long enough for any discussion about working practices. But I hope there's a few little nuggets that people will go on to explore further. Joan Littlewood is a name that, if you don't know about her, do some research on her, because she was an incredible human being.
It's just a force of nature, Joan.
And you worked. Hazel worked for a long time with her.
Yeah, because she approached stage design in a completely different way. I mean, she asked me. I said, "But Joan, I'm not a." When she wanted me to do Mrs. Wilson, I said, "I'm not a stage designer, Joan.
Maybe it's
I've worked in the theatre and was a prop maker."
Yeah.
But don't you think that was the 60s?
Oh, she said, "I don't want
Yes,
to."
But that, so my mum wouldn't have got a job being the fashion editor of Nova. She'd never done fashion in her life,
But she was
an artist.
Peter Brook didn't like.
Yes.
He didn't want people to read, the stage designer to read the play, maybe have a word with the director or whatever, and then go off and make a model and then carry it out. What I did and what Peter Brook liked you to do was to sit in on rehearsals, then go off, do some work. Then I go down below because there was a wonderful crew
quite organic.
for making, very, very organic.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have any models.
Has just left.
Yes.
Wonderful.
He's another name. Okay, Joan Littlewood, Peter Brook, Cedric Price,
Mr. Fuller.
Buckminster Fuller. Yeah, look them all up because they're all amazing people who've tried to change.
And they are very relevant, and they're what is not teaching as such, but their operation as human beings is very relevant now.
I think so.
And
I
what
think
is
so.
sidelined,
Because I
yeah.
think at the moment we're really coming to a point
Real
where
crunch.
we're about to implode, and we've got to have new ways of thinking
To evolve.
about how to deal with this whole situation and get out of this very staid, very old-fashioned, very backward thinking process of existing as humans at the moment.
I think that's
Yeah.
a good way to sum it up.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. Yeah. Excellent. Okay.